All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. Beautiful day ahead of us today. Let's begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's shirt. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, Shmuel Leba Dinovitz, for dedicating all the shiurim this month and the zechus of an aliyah for the neshama of Shmuel's father, HaRav Peretz Avraham, Harav Benyamin Moshe, Zichrono Livracha. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Ira and Miriam Grossman, in memory of Miriam's father, Ariyeh ben Moshe, on the occasion of his 20th Yahrzeit. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah and their families a neshama. We have thank our Daf Yomi sponsor, Rabbi Naftoli Edinger, in the zechus of the birth of his granddaughter, Batsheva Cyril Edinger, the Shuls' youngest, the newest member, Baruch Hashem. And we hope that Emir Hashem, this young lady, grows up to be an incredible Bas Yisrael and a Karas Habayis al Mea ve'esim Shanim Tovos. But mostly with that, let us begin. It is hard to believe that we have just begun our last week of Maseches Yevamos. It is a beautiful, it's been an incredible journey, Emir Hashem. And the last week is going to be exceptionally incredible as well. Also, by the way, I just want to point out, when I say we're beginning our last week of Maseches Yevamos, that's not like, yay, we're beginning our last week of Maseches Yevamos. It's very, I will say, no, it's important. It's in any relationship. In any relationship, there are times in which it's easy. There are times in which every day is like beautiful, the sun's out, the birds are chirping. There are times where it's a little bit more difficult. But it's all part of the same beautiful relationship. And it's naive to think that the challenging times are not as much a part of the fabric of the relationship as the good times. Not to say that Yevamos is like a challenging time in a relationship, but again, it's important to understand that Yevamos is just as important as brachas, is just as anything else. And so, again, we will see how Yevamos has enriched our lives. Sometimes you don't necessarily see it b'shas ma'isa when you're learning it, but l'maisa in retrospect, we'll all see how this Masechta added so much to who and what we are. And especially we're going to see these sugis that we're doing are absolutely incredible and overwhelming. So I will say today's daf is Kuf Yud Ches 118. We are picking up. We actually, Baruch Hashem, got through the whole block yesterday, a little bit over time, but we're picking up on 117b, Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Beis at the Mishnah. So I will say continuing in this sugya of testimony regarding the death of a husband. So it says the Mishnah, Achos omeres meis, va'achos omeres lo meis. So I'll say this is an interesting case. Here's the situation. If you look at the Rashi in the Mishnah, Rashi 5 lines up from the bottom, Achos omeres meis, shtei noshin tsaros, haba'os mivadinas hayam. Achos omeres meis finally, v'tzrasa omeres lo meis. Okay, this is an interesting one. Reuven is married to two women, Rachel and Leah. All three of them go overseas, vacation. Not sure how that went, right? But Lamaisa, again, actually we know how it went. They come back, Rachel says he's dead, Leah says he's not. Right? So clearly it didn't go well, right? But Lamaisa, and so this is a fascinating case. See, here you have the co-wives contradicting each other. Rachel says he's dead, Leah says he's not. So what's the halacha? Zusha omeres meis tina sevitidok subasa, v'zusha omeres lo meis, Lo tinasi, v'lo tidok suvasa. So what's the psak halacha? So remember again, as strange as this sounds, so look, Rachel, who said that Reuven is dead, based on her testimony, remember she is believed, the woman is believed to testify regarding her husband, once again, as long as there are two criteria intact, which are? Excellent. Shalom in the world, shalom in her marriage. So Lamaisa, again, Rachel is permitted to go ahead and remarry, and based on what we saw in yesterday's daf, once you're permitted to remarry, you're also entitled to what? Collect ksuva. So she's entitled to remarry, entitled to collect ksuva. Leah, who said that Reuven is not dead, cannot get remarried and cannot collect ksuva. Okay? Achas, so that's case 1. Case 2. Achas omeres meis va'achas omeres neherag. So I'll say this is an interesting case. In case number 2, Rachel comes back and Rachel says Reuven died. Leah comes back and says he didn't die, he was killed. He was killed. So I will say what's interesting about this case is what? Both are agreeing that what's the current state of Reuven? Deceased, right? The machlokis over here is they're not agreeing on the circumstances of his death. Rabbi Meir says, Holu machishos zu et zu, hare elu lo yinasu. So this is incredible. Rabbi Meir says, listen, at the end of the day, they're contradicting each other. So because they're contradicting each other, albeit about the circumstances of his death, their testimony essentially cancels out one another. And therefore, no one could remarry. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Omer, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon disagree. They say no. Hoil v'zu modos she'im kayim yinasu. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon says they're not contradicting each other. At the end of the day, they're both agreeing that what? Reuven is dead. The fact that Rachel says he died naturally and Leah says he was killed, what does it matter? What does it matter? At the end of the day, they're both agreeing that he's dead, and therefore, ultimately, again, both are permitted to go ahead and remarry. So we'll say that's case 2. Case 3. 8 Omer Meis, the 8 Omer Lo Meis. 1 8 Echad says Reuven is dead. 1 8 Echad says he's not dead. So what's the halacha? Top of Kuf Yud Ches. Or Isha Omeres Meis, the Isha Omeres Lo Meis. Or a woman, for that matter, comes along and says Reuven's dead. Another woman comes along and says Reuven's not dead. Hare zu lo tinase. Ultimately, again, you can't get remarried in a situation like this. Now, both say we're going to clarify that case because that seems to contradict a little bit about what we learned in yesterday's daf. Because we learned in yesterday's daf that what? Any situation where halacha l'maisa you believe in eid echad. What's the power of an eid echad? Like 2 witnesses. So I will say, remember again, we saw this was the first mission in yesterday's daf that essentially once based in gives her a heter to remarry, even based on the edus of an eid echad, that's it. It's locked in. It's locked in. And halacha l'maisa again, even if subsequent edus comes, it doesn't reverse it. So we'll see how to reconcile that in just a moment. So we'll say, let's analyze the cases. So we're going to first take a look at case number 1. Taima da Amar Lo Meis. So let's remember again. In case number one, Rachel comes back from the overseas vacation and she says Reuven's dead. Right? Leah comes back and says he's not dead. He's not dead. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Rachel can get remarried. Leah cannot. So says the Gemara, Taima da Amar Lo Meis. The reason why Leah can't get remarried is why? Because she's claiming that Reuven's not dead. That's why she can't get remarried. So the Gemara says, Ha ishtika tinase. I will say what you could infer from the Mishnah is what? Let's say they come back from vacation, Rachel and Leah, not Reuven, right? Rachel says Reuven's dead. And what does Leah say? Nothing. So what would you infer from the Mishnah? What would you infer? That Leah could get remarried as well. Whoa, that doesn't work. We learned in yesterday's daf that what? Ha-ein Sarah mi'ida l'chaverta. The boss said we learned that one of the women who cannot testify on behalf of another woman is her co-wife. Her co-wife, right? Co-wives have, again, this built-in inherent animosity towards one another. So ultimately, so we'll say, no, if Rachel comes back and says Reuven's dead, and Leah is silent, the diuk from the Mishnah is that Leah should be able to get remarried. But yet we learned in yesterday's daf that would not work. To which the Gemara says, this is incredible. Lo meis is strichale. Now I'll tell you the novelty. I will say this is fascinating. See, I would have thought like this. Rachel comes back and says, Reuven died. Leah says he didn't die. So the Gemara says, here's the Havamina, how I would have interpreted Leah's words. Saradai Tchamina Hamais. In reality, I would say, Rachel's right. Reuven is dead. So if Reuven's dead, why is Leah saying he's not dead? So the Gemara says, V'hadika amar lo meis, l'kilkula l'tzara hidimachavna. They will say, why is Leah saying that Reuven's not dead? Because she wants to give a shtach to Rachel. She doesn't want Rachel to be able to get married, to get remarried. Ira Bosai, if Rachel can't get remarried, then who else can't get remarried? Leah. Rabbi say, listen to this. V'tamos nafsha implishtim ka'amra. Rabbi say, this is an incredible expression. Tamos nafshi implishtim, Rabbi say, was a phrase said by Shimshon. We know the story of Shimshon, right? Shimshon was one of the Shoftim of Klal Yisrael. Shimshon, at the end of his life, is captured by the Plishtim and is blinded by the Plishtim. And the Plishtim made sport with him. Right? He was fighting in the Philistine Colosseum. Shimshon's last act is, he says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, give me strength to push down the pillars of the Philistine Colosseum and bring down the Colosseum upon everyone. Even though that would mean what? Shimshon would die as well. There's an expression of Tamos Nafshi in Plishtim. So I will say, the way the Gemara often uses that is that sometimes people are willing to hurt themselves if it means that they have the ability to hurt someone else. In other words, sometimes I despise someone so much that if I can go ahead and harm them, even though the roof's going to come down on me as well, I'm willing to do that. So the Gemara says something wild. The Gemara says when Rachel shows up and says Reuven's dead, and Leah says, no, he's not. Maybe what's really happening over here is like this. Reuven is really dead. So why is Leah contradicting Rachel? Why? Because she wants to give it to Rachel. But she's giving it to herself as well. She's going to be compromised as well. Tamas nafshe plishtim. Sometimes, again, a person is willing to do something actively detrimental to themselves if it allows them to turn on supposed to say, by the way, it sounds crazy, but it happens all the time. Right? I guess what's the expression, cutting off my nose despite my face? In other words, I will say that at the end of the day, and this, let's say I just point out, this is the destructive nature of kas, of anger, right? Of sinah. Right? They will say, this is why the Torah says, Lo sisna es achicha bilbavecha. Do not go ahead and hate your brother in your heart. They will say, why? When you harbor animosity against another person, it has a corrosive effect on who you are. And sometimes a person becomes so thoroughly corroded that at the end of the day, I'm willing to go ahead and hurt someone else, even though it hurts me. Let's just hand out jackets. It's okay. You know, I have like PTSD from yesterday. Just leave it. Right? So at the end of the day, I will say that's the Torah says. Lo sisna zachicha b'vavecha. If you hold animosity in your heart, it makes you do the craziest of things. So the Havamina is over here that Leah really feels that what? Leah really knows that Reuven is dead, but Lamaisa should rather go down with the ship. And therefore, we'll say what? And therefore, Kamash Malon, no, we'll say, so Kamash Malon, that's not how we interpret it. And I will say to the point that even if Leah were to later on explain, I didn't really mean that Reuven was alive, I was just trying to give a shtach to Rachel, we don't believe her. So therefore, I will say, Halacha Lamaisa, we don't interpret Leah's words any differently than the way she's saying them. We interpret it ultimately, again, as two different accounts of what's happening to Reuven. So Rachel could move forward based on her testimony, and Leah cannot move forward based on her testimony. Incredible. Achas omeres meis. Shabbos says, remember again, that's case number one. So case number one is Rachel says Reuven's dead. Leah says, no, he's not. Rachel could remarry and get her ksuba. Leah cannot. Case two, Rabbosai. What was case two? Case 2 was Achas Omeres Meis, Va'achas Omeres Nehrag. Rachel says Reuven's dead. Leah says he was killed. So in this case, both agreeing that Halacha L'maisa, Reuven's dead. They're just contradicting. They just have different accounts as to how it occurred. So ultimately, you're going to say, what happens? Rabbi Meir says they're contradicting each other. So because they're contradicting each other, ultimately, again, neither can remarry. Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Shimon say, Halacha L'maisa, no. They're not contradicting each other. They're both agreeing he's dead, they can both remarry. So ask the Gemara, I don't say, V'lithol Rabbi Meir Bereisha, why doesn't Rabbi Meir argue in the first case? And as we'll say, in case number one, they're also contradicting each other. Right? They will say, what's case number one? Rachel says Reuven's dead. Shimon says, no, he's not. So Rabbi Meir, where are you in case number one? Right? If Rabbi Meir, if you're worried about people contradicting each other, we'll say, Rabbi Meir's position is, when the co-wives contradict each other, what happens? Effectively, what happens? They cancel each other out. So why is Rabbi Meir silent in case number one, only commenting on case number two? To which the Gemara says, you're right. In reality, the entire Rashi says you're right. It's the same machlokes. Same way that Rabbi Meir argues on case number two, Rabbi Meir also argues on case number one. Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Shimoni, Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Afilu Tim, Rabbi Meir. Maybe not. So we'll say, so first opinion is Rabbi Meir will even disagree on case number one. Second approach is, Rabbi Yochanan says, no, Afilu Tim, Rabbi Meir. It could even be that Rabbi Meir would even agree in case number one. Why? So, Baha Afilu Rabbi Meir Moda, Dechol Delo Meis Be'edus Isha Lav HaChoshehi. So we'll say, this is very interesting. Rabbi Meir holds that Allah Chalamaisa, if a woman number one comes along and says Reuven's dead, and then woman number two, co-wife number two says he's not dead, Rabbi Meir says that's not called a contradiction. Why is that not called a contradiction, Rabbi Osai? Because Rashi says this goes back to yesterday's daf, because once we accept the testimony of wife number one, then what? She's locked in. She's locked in. The Gemara says, Tnan, eight omer meis, ve'eit omer lo meis, isha omeres meis, ve'isha omeres lo meis, hare zolo tinase. Rabbi said, what do you do with the last part of the Mishnah? The last part of the Mishnah says, if one woman says he died, one woman says he didn't die, Eid Echad says he died, Eid Echad says he didn't die, what's the halacha? Again, they do contradict each other. Bish Shlomo and Rabbi Lazar, Stomach Rabbi Meir. According to Rabbi Lazar, this makes sense, because Rabbi Meir holds, even in the first case, that they're contradicting each other. Elul Rabbi Yochanan Kasha. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's going to be a Kasha. Indeed, it's a Kasha. So Rabbi will say, so what happens in this case, by the way? This is very important, because we are left off a little bit of a contradiction. When you have two Eid Echads, right, or two co-wives, whoever they are, contradicting each other about what happened to the husband. So Rabbi will say, what is the net effect? Remember again, based on yesterday's daf, if we have two Eid Echads contradicting each other, what's the halacha? Based on yesterday's daf, what would you say? Once we believe the first Eid Echad, it sounds like the second Eid Echad is not believed. Yet from our Mishnah over here, it sounds like what? If two Eid Echads contradict each other, they cancel each other out. So we'll say, this is incredible. The Girs in the Rambam, I'll quote this to you. The Girs in the Rambam, I think, clarifies this whole thing. The Rambam, commenting on our Mishnah, says, Bo shnehem ke'echad. Ke'echad. So we'll say, the Rambam makes the following chilek. If two people show up at Beis Din, two Eid Echads, or for that matter, two co-wives show up in Beis Din, and at the same time give their testimony. Rachel says he's dead. Leah says he's not dead. And they're testifying at the same time. That's when they cancel each other out. And by the way, the effect of canceling each other out is what? They cannot remarry. Status quo. Status quo. Same thing if it's not the co-wives. Two Eid Echas come along and say, Ruvain's dead, Ruvain's not dead. If it's Ke'echad, if they're coming at the same time, they cancel each other out, status quo remains. Yesterday's daf was talking about what? Bezeh achar zeh. Oh, bezeh achar zeh. Eid Echad shows up in Beis Din. Ruvain's dead. Beis Din paskins, Rachel, you could get remarried. Here's your ksuva. And then sometime afterwards, a second Eid Echad comes. That's when we don't listen to the testimony of the second Eid Echad. So I would say fascinating. Ke'echad, they'll cancel each other out. Bezeh achar zeh. Once the first Eid Echad is locked in, second Eid Echad is locked out. Incredible. Mishnah, ha'isha shahalcha hiyo bailam dinas hayam. So it is getting a little chilly. It's getting a little chilly now. As the Gemara says, ha'isha shahalcha. I shouldn't complain. It's like, al tiftach tela satan. But, good. Ha'isha shahalcha hiyo bailam dinas hayam. So we'll say, what happens? Salach lamaisa, a woman goes overseas with her husband. Now we'll say, watch this case. These are really, really fascinating cases. Ha'isha shahalcha hiyo bailam dinas hayam. A woman goes overseas together with her husband. Okay. Uba va'amra, she comes back from vacation. Va'amra, meis ba'ali. My husband died. Okay. So we'll say, simple, straightforward case. Tina say, betital ksuvasa, vitsara sa'asura. So we'll say, so this is a case, remember again, Rachel and I are married to Ruvain. Right? What happens? Rachel goes overseas with Ruvain. She comes back. She says, Ruvain died. So we'll say, what's the halacha? She is permitted to go ahead and remarry, collect her ksuva, but of course her co-wife is not. Because remember again, Rachel's testimony is only believed for herself, not believed for her co-wife. Okay? Therefore we'll say, so now let's analyze this for just a moment. So we'll say, that's not a chiddush, we know that. What's our question now? So what is the status of the co-wife? So therefore Rachel is permitted to get married and collect her ksuva, because she's believed about her own testimony. Her testimony does not work for Leah, her co-wife. So we'll say, now watch this. We'll say, let's say for argument's sake, Ruvain was a Kohen. So now again, I will say, and let's say Leah, the co-wife, was a Bas Yisrael who married a Kohen, which means, as a result of her marriage to Ruvain, she's permitted to eat what? Truma. So I will say, what's that? Look, I said Bas Yisrael a Kohen, Tochel b'truma to Rabbi Tarfon. So Rabbi Tarfon says, look, you're right. So therefore, it's true. Leah can't get remarried on the basis of Rachel's testimony. So what's Leah's status? She's still married, which means what? She's truma. She is, in other words, even if we say she's the widow of a Kohen, that's fine. She continues to eat truma. I will say, watch this. Rabbi Akiva says no. Ein derech zeh motzi asu midei avera. Rabbi Akiva says, here's the problem. I'll say, literally translated, this approach does not remove her from possible Aveira. Ad shetei asur linasei v'asura le'echol b'truma. So also Rabbi Akiva says something amazing. Rabbi Akiva says, here's the problem. When Rachel comes back and says that Ruvain died, and therefore based on that we're going to say that what? Rachel could get remarried, collect her ksuva. What's Leah's status? Right. Status quo. Rabbi Akiva says, but come on. We can't totally ignore the fact that Rachel testified that Ruvain's dead, right? And even got remarried and collected a ksuva. So even though we're not going to allow Leah to get remarried, so Leah can't get remarried, but we also can't allow Leah to what? Eat truma. Because the concern is, if Rachel's right, or maybe even, right? So in other words, the idea over here is because we don't know what really happened to Ruvain, we can't allow Leah to continue to eat truma. Now, both sides. Now, this is actually very interesting. If you take a look at Rashi says over here. Actually, no, not yet. We'll see in the Gemara. So let's go back to. So we'll say this part of Rabbi Akiva is actually a little bit interesting because the truth is, no matter what happened to Ruvain, so Leah should technically be permitted to go ahead. Well, actually, I take that back. We'll see, because if Ruvain's really dead and Leah's a Bas Yisrael, then at the end of the day, her ability to eat Truma really runs out. Let's see, let's go weiter. So the Gemara says as follows. Amra meis baili v'achakach meis chami. So we'll say another case, very interesting case as well. So Rachel goes overseas with her husband, Ruvain, and her father-in-law, Yaakov. Okay? So now she comes back. She says, Meis baili v'achakach meis chami. So she says, my husband died, and then my father-in-law died. So what's the halacha? Tinase v'tital ksuvasa. Ultimately, again, she has the ability to what? She gets remarried, collects her ksuva. What about her mother-in-law? V'chamosa asura. Her mother-in-law is not permitted to get remarried. Now, again, remember, why is that? Because we saw in yesterday's daf, a daughter-in-law is not believed to testify regarding her mother-in-law. This is one of these innate relationships where there is animosity. Therefore, Haise Bas Yisrael Kohen, if the mother-in-law was a Bas Yisrael who was married to a Kohen, so in other words, Yaakov, the father-in-law, was a Kohen, so therefore the mother-in-law is permitted to continue to eat Truma. Talk about Truma. Dear Rabbi Tarfon. So we'll say once Rabbi Tarfon says, okay, her status is that she's a married woman, and therefore again, because she's a married woman, she can continue to eat Truma. Rabbi Akiva says no. Ein zuderach motzia midi aveira. Rabbi Akiva says no. At the end of the day, her status is in doubt, and therefore what? Rabbi Akiva says no. As much as the mother-in-law cannot get remarried, she also can't eat truma. This way we go ahead. Rabbi Akiva essentially says you have to cover your bases. As much as we're not going to believe the testimony of a co-wife or of a daughter-in-law to allow the co-wife or the mother-in-law to get remarried, we have to take it into account enough to prevent her from further eating truma. Okay, so we'll say fundamental machlokes Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon. Let's analyze. Utzricha. And I will say now the truth is, we seemingly have two redundant cases. As I will say, both cases in the Mishnah are pretty much the same, right? What's common denominator? Case number one is Rachel comes back, testifies that her husband Ruvain died, or Ruvain the Kohen died, right? And therefore, what's the halacha? The halacha is her testimony is believed regarding herself, but not believed regarding her co-wife. Therefore, she can get remarried, collect her ksuva, but her co-wife cannot. Rabbi Tarfon says, therefore again, halacha lamaisa, her co-wife continues as a regular married woman, meaning she could continue to eat truma. Rabbi Akiva says no. She can't get remarried, but she also can't continue to eat truma. Case number two, Rachel goes overseas with her husband, her father-in-law, comes back and says they both died. What's the halacha? Rachel could get remarried, collect her ksuva, but her mother-in-law cannot. And Rabbi Tarfon says the mother-in-law could continue to eat truma. Rabbi Akiva says no, she can't. So we'll say it's the same case. To which the Gemara says it's tzricha. Why in both cases? I'll tell you why. If it would have just said the first case, see, I would have said that perhaps again Rachel is not believed. Why? Because there is a physical deprivation she suffers because of her co-wife Leah. They have to share the same husband. They have to share the same husband. So that physically affects Rachel. That's why, again, she's totally not believed in this case. But I will say, ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, in the case of a mother-in-law, how much harm could a mother-in-law do to a daughter-in-law? Right? I will say, at most, what type of harm is it? Verbal harm. Verbal harm. Maybe in that case, ultimately, again, Rabbi Akiva abuses Rabbi Akiva. V'i itmar baha, if we just said the first case, baha kam Rabbi Akiva, ava baha imodei Rabbi Tarfon, therefore it's tzricha. So there was in both cases. Amriv dem Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Huda says the name of Shmuel, that the halacha follows Rabbi Tarfon. Which means what Rabbi say? Rabbi Tarfon holds that whenever a woman is not believed regarding another woman, whether it's her tzara or her co-wife, the co-wife and the mother-in-law remain in their total marital state, which means that halacha l'maisa, if they're married to a Kohen, they could even what? Continue to eat truma. So the Gemara says, Amrabai, Afana Navi Tanina, Nitani Ben, B'Medinas HaRav is actually our next Mishnah. We're going to see that halacha l'maisa, if a woman goes overseas, and she left town without children, and she claims she had children, and afterwards she says, then she claims my son died, and then my husband died. We'll see this case in the next Mishnah. Ne'amena, she is believed. But if she claims my husband died, and then my son died, and therefore she's not subject to Yibum, Eina ne'amenes, she is not believed. V'chosheshin lidvareha, v'choletes v'lo misyabemes. But we're choshesh for her words, which we make her do chalitza and not do yibum. So the Gemara says, "Dvarahu de chosheshin, haladivrei tzara in chosheshin." We see that we only take her words into account for herself, but not for her tzara. So therefore, Rabbi say, halacha l'maisa, the way we paskin in both of these cases is as follows. In case number one, where Rachel comes back from overseas and she says Reuven is dead. Reuven is dead, so she is believed regarding herself. Namely, she can get remarried and collect her ksuba. What's the impact of her testimony upon Leah, her co-wife? What's the impact? 0. Which means Leah is still considered to be a fully married woman. And if Reuven was a Kohen, Leah is eligible to what? Continue to eat truma. So Rachel's words have absolutely no impact on Leah on any level. Similarly, if Rachel goes overseas with her husband and her father-in-law, and she comes back and she says, my husband died, Reuven died, my father-in-law Yaakov died, a whole family of Kohanim, so she is believed regarding herself. She could remarry, she could collect her ksuva. What's the impact of her testimony on her mother-in-law? 0. Which means that her mother-in-law is still married, and the mother-in-law is still entitled to what? Eat truma. That's how you paskin. Good about say, I'm a base. New Mishnah. Kidesh achas mechamesha. Shabbos say, this is such a fascinating case. Listen to this. A man was mekadesh one of 5 women. Ve'ein yodea ezo kidesh. You're not Shabbos say, this is what I say. Don't drink at the chassan's dish, right? It's a good idea. Don't drink at the chassan's dish, right? See, he went ahead and he did kiddushin with one woman, but he's not sure which one. Now what happens? So you have 5. Here's the good news. We've narrowed it down to 5, right? So we'll say, so it's one of 5 women. So what's the halacha? Kol achas omer. So we'll say, so here's the problem. So that's, okay, maybe you'd say that by itself is a problem. The problem is compounded. Why? Kol achas omeres osi kidesh. Here's what I will say. All 5 are claiming, right, that they are the one. Right? So now we have a problem. So we know it's one of these 5, right? We don't know which one, and each woman is claiming, I'm the one. All right. Similarly, so we'll say, so what do you do? So what do you do in this case? What do you do in this case? Go overseas, right? That's what you're doing, right? Go overseas. So the Gemara says, no, you have to rectify the situation. No sin get l'chol achos v'achos. Okay, you give a get to each woman. So I'll say, here's the shaila. What do you do with the ksuva? Watch this. So first, Rabbi Tarfon says, "Umaniach ksuva achas b'neihen umistalik." What do? You drop a bag of ksuva money in the middle and run, right? Run. Good. From mistalik, Div Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Kiva says no. Omer ein zudech motzim de'avera ad shiten get uksuva l'chol achas v'achas. Rabbi Kiva says no. That's not the right derech. Right? The right derech is just like you give a get to each of these women, you give each of them a ksuva as well. give each of them the ksuva as well. They're both saying, now the truth is, Rabbi Akiva is almost saying like, Lifnim Mishuras Hadin. That this is the correct, even if you look at his Lashon, Ein derech zu motzi midei aveira. If you want, what's the path that removes you from wrongdoing? Pay each of them. Both say, if you think about this, just in a simple Dine Mamonis. Now both say again, Dine Mamonis 101 says that what? When there is Mamon Amuta B'Safek, right? When you have ultimately, again, you're not sure about money, remember, the obligation always rests upon who? The extractor. Hamotzi mechaveira alav harayah. Shabbos say it's no different in this case over here. All 5 women are claiming that they're the wife. Okay, prove it. So you give each of them a get, When it comes to the monetary compensation, Rabbi Tafron really seems to be the correct approach. Put the bag of money there and look, the truth is, I'm paying a ksuva. Who is entitled to this? You guys figure it out. So Gemara goes weiter. Similarly, Gazal Echa Mechamisha, Ve'eniyodem Me'iza Gazal. Well, it's fascinating. I stole from someone. I know that it's one of 5 people. I don't know which one. I don't know who is the affected party. Who is the victim? Who is the victim of this party? Kolecha Omer Osi Gazal. Everyone's claiming that what? They're the victim. So what's talacha? Maniach Gzela Beinen Mistalik. Rabbi Tarfon says, put the stolen object in the middle and run. In other words, I have to return the stolen object. It's not clear who I stole from. I'm returning the stolen object. They were here. Rabbi Tarfon says, no. Ein zu derech motzimi de aveira. Rabbi Kiva says, well, say first wide line, that's not the way to rectify your wrongdoing. Ad shishem b'cholecha ve'echad. You have to pay back each of the aggrieved parties. Shabbos say, I'll point out, by the way, you notice that the cases in the Mishnah are not symmetrical. Right? Shabbos say, the first case is a case of Kiddush, and the second case is what? Aveira. Shabbos say, so again, already we're going to see that these cases are not the same. So let's analyze this a little bit. Shabbos say, so the Gemara says, well, say first wide line, Kuf Yud Ches Mabez 118b. Kiddush katani, Baal lo katani. Gazal katani, Lakach lo katani. Shabbos said, this is interesting. The first case of the Mishnah is Kiddush. The Rebbe will say, the Pashtos Kiddush means what? How did you affect Kiddushin? Money. As opposed to a case of Baal, where you affected Kiddushin through Bia. Now we'll say, we know, right? Kiddushin, Beis, and Aleph. There are 3 ways to affect Kiddushin. Kesef, Shtar, and Bia. Money, a document, and relations. The Rebbe will say, Chazal did not want people affecting Kiddushin with Bia. In fact, to do Kiddushin with Bia is an Isser D'Rabbanan. So I will say, it's interesting to note over here as follows. The Lashon of the Mishnah is Kiddush. Right? So Kiddush sounds like he's affecting Kiddushin with money. Baal lo katani. So if you look at the second Mishnah, Gazal katani, the Mishnah sets it up as a case of theft. Lakach lo katani. So I will say, Lakach means what? So Gezel means theft, as opposed to what? A case of a purchase. In other words, you could have set up the second case of the Mishnah as what? I bought an item from someone, I didn't yet pay them. Right? But now, I don't know who I bought it from. It's one of 5 people. Each of the 5 people say what? You bought it from, you owe me the money. It doesn't say that. Instead it says a case of Gezel. So watch this. Money must nisin. So who's the does the Mishnah reflect? So the Gemara says, Lo Tanakam of Lo Rabbi Shimon Elazar. It's not the Tanakam, it's Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Why not? What's listening to this? The Sanya, Rabbi Shimon Elazar Omer, this is fascinating. Lo nechluku Rabbi Tafron Rabbi Akiva al shekidish achas mechamesh nashim. Ve'enu yodea eze kiddush. So I will say, Rabbi Tafron Rabbi Akiva don't disagree in the following case. Where a man was mekadesh woman. I will say mekadesh with what? With what? What? Kesef. So in the case where a man was mekadesh a woman, one of 5 women, and he doesn't know who he was mekadesh, shamaniach ksuva beinehen umistalik. Then ultimately I will say, what does he do? He places the ksuva in front of them. And ultimately, what could he do? He leaves. He walks away. So we'll say, Aman nechlaku al sheba. We'll say, now here's what's interesting. According to Shimon Elazar, he was like this. Rabbi Tafron and Rabbi Akiva both agree. In a non-Aveira case, like a case, we were a Mekadesh woman with money, and you don't know who you are Mekadesh. So we'll say, what do you have to do? In terms of a get, you have to give a get to each of them. When it comes to ksuva, what do you have to do? Just place one bag of ksuva money in the middle and walk away. Aman mechluku. Where's the machlokes Rabbi Kiva Rabbi Tarfon? Al Shabal. Oh, the machlokes Rabbi Kiva Rabbi Tarfon is where? In the case of Avera, where a man was mekadish bebiyah and he doesn't know which woman it was. Rabbi Tarfon says, Maniach ksuva b'nei mistalech. In that case, Rabbi Tarfon says, all you have to do is leave one bag of money in the middle and walk away. Rabbi Kiva Omer Achi Shalim Mechal Achas V'Achas. Rabbi Kiva says, no, you did something wrong. We're going to penalize you. How are we going to penalize you? You did Kiddushin Bebiyah. You're going to have to pay a ksuva to each of these women. Similarly, Lo Nechleku Rabbi Tarfon Rabbi Kiva Asher Lakach Mekach Mechamisha B'nei Adam Ve'eino Demez and Lakach. Similarly, again, what Rabbi Shimon Elazar says, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon agree. If you purchase something from someone, right, one of 5 people, and you don't know who it is, and all 5 people are claiming, I'm the seller, then what's the halacha? Shamaniach t'nei mekach b'neihem v'nistalik. That you put the purchase money in the middle, and you could absent yourself. Lo nechluku ela al shegazal mechamisha. They will say, what's the case of machlokes? You stole from one person, 5 people are claiming to be the victim. In that case, Rabbi Tarfon maniach gzela b'neihem umistalik. Rabbi Tarfon says, still put the object back in the middle and walk away. Rabbi Akiva Omer Ad Sheyishanu Gzela Kol Echad Ve'echad. Rabbi Akiva on the other hand says, no, you have to pay back each of the potentially aggrieved parties. Shabbosai, I want to point out something very interesting. According to Rabbi Shimon Elazar, it's a very interesting approach. He holds that Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva agree in these cases of doubt. If we'll call it the perpetrator did nothing wrong, he's not financially penalized. Where does the machlokes come up? Where he did something wrong. He was mekadesh bebiyah, or he stole. In that case, Rabbi Tarfon will still say, all he's obligated is to do, give one ksuva, or repay one item. Rabbi Kiva says, no, you did something wrong, you're going to be penalized. 5 ksuvas. You have to repay the item to 5 potential aggrieved victims. Midkamer Shimon Elazar, B'kidish v'lakach lo pligi. So the Rabbi Shimon Elazar says that in the case of kiddush v'lakach, in other words, non-illegal activity, that Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Tarfon don't disagree, or they agree. Mechlal the Tanakama savar pligi. Tanakama must hold that they do disagree. So money, who's it in the Mishnah? Eat Tanakama, listen kiddush v'lakach. If it's the Tanakama, let the Tanakama say kiddush v'lakach. Not Kiddush v'gazal. Ira Miriam Grossman, listening Baal v'gazal. And Rabbi Shimon Elazar, let the Mishnah say a case of Baal and Gazal. To which the Gemara says, the Olam, Rabbi Shimon Elazar, Shabbos release Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Umay Kiddush. What's the case of Kiddush of the Mishnah? The case of Kiddush ultimately again is Bebiyah. Is the case of Kiddush Bebiyah. To which the Gemara says, Tana Kiddush lo diacha kochod Rabbi Akiva. And both say, therefore, the Mishnah Dafka does a case of Kiddush. That even in the case of Kiddush, coming to teach us the power of Rabbi Akiva's position, the Afagav, the Isser D'Rabbanan of it, even though all he did in this case was an Isser D'Rabbanan, he did Kiddush in Nebiyah. Nevertheless, Kanas, Chazal penalized him and says he has to give a ksuva to each of these women. The Gemara says, Tana Gazal, suddenly again we go and we put a case of Gazal, of Yochad Kochad Rabbi Tarfon, the Afagav, the Isser D'Oraisa Avid Lo Kanas, and we go ahead and we highlight the case of Gazal, ultimately again to teach us what? That halacha l'maisa, even though he did enact an Isser D'Oraisa, according to Rabbi Tarfon, he only has to pay back one person. I will say, how do we pass in halacha l'maisa? So I will say, essentially halacha l'maisa, we pass like this. If it's a case of non-avera, we'll pass in like Rabbi Tarfon. Namely, you were a mekadesh woman with money. One of 5, you don't remember who. Each of the 5 claims that halacha l'maisa, it was me. So what's the halacha? You have to give a get to each of them, but only one ksuba. You put the ksuba down in the middle and run like no one's business, right? That's how you pass in that case. The Bible says similarly again, if you purchased an item, but you don't know who the purchaser is, and all 5 people are claiming that halacha l'maisa, it's me. What do? Put one payment in the middle and run. The Bible says, what's the logic of that? By the way, it makes sense. What's the logic? Because the Bible says, in this case, 4 out of the 5 people are lying. See, I will say, in this case, I'm not the guy who did something wrong. Okay, I was a little sloppy in how I got married, right? But l'maisa, again, I didn't commit an isser. I didn't commit an isser. 4 out of the 5 women over here are lying. I might have been sloppy how I affected the purchase, but 4 out of the 5 people claiming to be the seller are lying. So in those cases, we pass the Rabbi Tarfon. Give each woman a get, put one ksub in the middle. Put the payment in the middle, and that's it. Rabbi say, conversely, in the case where I committed an Aveira, it's fascinating. There, we pass like Rabbi Akiva. I'm pass as Rabbi Akiva, which makes sense. Because if I committed an Aveira, then the onus is on me. So I was Mekadesh Umen Bebiyah, that is an Isser D'Rabbanan. I shouldn't have done that. Okay, you're sloppy with an Isser, then Lamais, again, the onus is upon me. I have to pay a ksuva to each of these women. I stole, and I don't know from whom I stole. Ultimately, again, it's a knas. I just want to point out, it's a penalty. Right? So now I want to do tshuva, I have to give out tshuva. Okay, you know who you stole from? Pay back all 5 people. Fascinating. So again, in non-Avera cases, we pass the Rabbi Tarfon, and in Avera case, we pass the Rabbi here. We'll say last Mishnah of the parak. Here we go. Fascinating. Ha'isha shalcha b'hi u'bayla medinas hayam. Listen to this. Woman goes overseas, back to these cases. Woman goes overseas with her husband. So we'll say what happens. So ubna imayim. She goes overseas with her son. Family vacation. Her son, her husband, herself. Basava amra meis ba'li b'achach meis bini. So we'll say she comes back and she says, listen, unfortunately everyone died. But I will say, remember again, the order of how people died is very important. Right? Let's just talk about it just a moment. Remember again, I will say, right? If her husband dies first and then her son, then what? No yibum. If her son dies first and then her husband, yibum. So I will say, so her testimony over here is not just about who died, but the order of how they died is incredibly important as well. So watch this. So the Gemara says, Ubasava Amra Meis Baili Va'achakach Meis Bini. She comes back and she says, my husband died and then my son died. Right? So what's the halacha? Ne'emenes. She's believed. And I will say, now why is she believed? So the truth is she's believed because halacha lamaisa, that's her chazaka when she left. Right? Her chazaka when she left town is that she was a woman who was not subject to yibum because she had a child. Her husband had a child. So if she comes back and she says, everyone died, it was first my husband, then my son, okay, we accept that testimony. However, meis b'ni va'achakach meis b'ili eino ne'emenes. But I will say, watch this. If she comes back and she says, my son died and then my husband died, she's not believed. I will say, why is she not believed? This is fascinating. She's believed to say her husband died. What she's not believed, I will say, is what? To make herself muteres to the yavam. See, I will say, that far we're not going to go. Because if we accept her testimony, that halacha l'maisa, her son died and then her husband died, based on that, we're going to permit her to marry her brother-in-law. So I will say, so remember again, when it comes to her own testimony, we're willing to let her get remarried. But apparently allowing her to go ahead and be matur and erva, that we're not ready to do. However, the choshesh in lidvareha, we don't totally discount her words, and therefore, the cholet says v'lo misyaveres. I will say what we will do in that case is we kind of accept her words. In other words, so we'll make her do chalitza, but we'll not allow her to do yibum. That way again, if she's telling the truth, we're covered. And if she's not telling the truth, then what? Well, says, chalitza really never, right? Chalitza never hurts, so to speak. It doesn't compromise anyone. So the Gemara goes weiter. Says that's case 1. Case 2. Supposed to listen to this. Let's say she goes overseas with her husband, right? And what happens? She leaves town, no child. She then comes back, she claims, I had a child while I was overseas. And what happened? My son died. And then my husband died. So we'll say in this case, ne'emenes. She's believed. Why? We'll say, why is she believed? Because what is she now saying? I'm subject to yibum. That's fine. Why? That's the chazaka with which she left town originally, right? She left town as a woman whose husband didn't have children. So now she says, okay, I had a kid, the kid died, then my husband died, fine. Meis b'ili, la'achach meis b'ni. However, we'll say, she comes back and she says, I had a child overseas, my husband died, and then my son died, ain't on that minute. So we'll say in this case she's not believed. Why? Because now her testimony is saying she's not subject to yibum, but yet her previous chazaka was that she was subject to yibum. Yet, I will say, what's the halacha? But we'll heed her words. How so? Chobetz is v'lo mesyabemes. We'll make her do chalitza and not yibum. Nitan liyavam ninas hayam. But we'll say, watch this case. She goes overseas with her husband and mother-in-law. I will say now again, when they leave, her husband is an only child. Right? She comes back and she says, a lot happened over vacation. My mother-in-law had a son. Right? They will say, and what? Number one, my mother-in-law had a son. Right? And what happens? So therefore, we'll say, what happens? Amra meis by livacha meis yivmi. And then what happens? She says, my husband died, and then his brother died. Ultimately, again, Amra meis by livacha meis yivmi. Or yivmi, vachach meis baili. Or she says, my brother-in-law died, and then my husband died. So ultimately, ne'emenes. See, Rabbi say, she's believed. Why is she believed, Rabbi say? Because once again, it's all about chazakah. When she left town, she had a chazakah of what? That there's no yibum in her family. Why is there no yibum in her family? Because her husband has no siblings. So she comes back and she says, my mother-in-law had a son. The son died, and then my husband died. My husband died, then my son died. Okay, it's still the same chazakah. In other words, she's not subject to yibum. So I will say, the bottom line is, the point over here, the Mishnah is, when she comes back, right? She goes overseas and she comes back. So testifying that her husband is dead, that's the easy part, so to speak. Right? Lamaisa, all of these other pieces, if these other pieces fit into the chazakah that she had when she left town, we'll believe her. If ultimately these additional pieces of information do not fit with the chazakah she had when she left town, then what? We will not believe her, but we'll be choshesh for her words. Last case I will say, or second last case. Let's listen to this. So she goes overseas with her husband and her brother-in-law. Right? So she's traveling. So Rachel goes overseas with her husband Reuben and her brother-in-law Shimon. So what happens? Amra, meis by the bachar meis yivmi. She says, my husband died and then my brother-in-law died. Or yivmi, va'achar kach baili. Or she says, my brother-in-law died and then my husband. Eina ne'emenes. She's not believed. Then I will say, why she's not believed? She'ina isha ne'emenes lomar meis yivmi shetinasi. Because I will say, this is a separate halacha. A woman is only believed to say what Rabbi say, that her husband died. She's not believed, she's an Eid Echad, right, when it comes to the fact that anyone else died. So when she goes overseas with her husband and her brother-in-law, she comes back and she says, my husband and my brother-in-law died. Whatever order she dies in, we don't listen to her regarding anything regarding her brother-in-law. Right? You will say, why? Because she is not believed to give edus regarding her brother-in-law. So what we'll listen to her is that her husband's dead. But I will say, the problem just is now, she's subject to evil. If her husband died and there's no children, she's subject to evil. She's saying, my yavam died. The brother-in-law died. Her testimony is not accepted regarding that. So the Gemara says, similarly, just like I will say, a woman is not believed to say that her sister died. Right? I will say, and which would allow her to what? To marry her brother-in-law. Right? She's not believed to say her sister died to marry her brother-in-law. Ve'ena ish ne'eman lomar meis achi shad isha. Similarly, I will say, a man is not believed to say, my brother died, and therefore I'm ready to do yibum with my sister-in-law. V'lo meisa ishto shisachosa. Nor is a man believed to say, my wife died, which would permit him then to marry her sister. Let's say fasting Allah. So we'll say, so again, this last piece is very interesting, which is, or the third to last piece, which is that when the wife goes overseas with her husband and her brother-in-law, that if she comes back and says they both died, she is only believed regarding her husband, not believed her yavam. And I will say, that's not just in her yavam. The only time we're accepting a woman's testimony is when regarding her own husband. But Lamaisa, regarding anything else, ultimately she's not really going to be believed. The only time she is believed, I will say, is when what she's testifying about confirms the chazakah she already had. Says the Gemara, I will say, very interesting case. So I will say, it's interesting, the Gemara doesn't discuss any of the cases. The cases, as they're quoted upon in the Mishnah, is Ira Miriam. But watch this case, I will say, fascinating. Let's finish up the parak. Ira Miriam Grossman. I will say a little bit of background to this. There is a concept in halacha of zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav, that you could do something beneficial for a person even without their knowledge or consent. But Rabbi say it has to be something objectively beneficial. So for example, I walk out of shul, I find a $100 bill. I say, you know what? I know Ruvain likes $100 bills. He's told me before. He really has an affinity. He collects them, right? He collects them. So I say, you know what? I'm acquiring this $100 bill on behalf of Ruvain. Ruvain never appointed me as a shaliach. He never appointed me as an agent. There's a concept of zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. You could do something beneficial for someone on their behalf without their consent, as long as it is objectively beneficial. Watch this. Now let's see, here we go. Ruvain wants to go ahead. And let's keep it simple. Ruvain wants to go ahead and appoint an agent to receive a get on his behalf. In other words, so Ruvain's married to Rachel, right? And we'll say, by the way, you can paint this case, right? Ruvain's on his deathbed, whatever it's, right? So let's paint it like that, right? Ruvain's dying. Ruvain has no children, right? Ruvain has a brother, Shimon. Ruvain doesn't want his wife to have to do yibum, right? So what does Ruvain want to do? He wants to divorce his wife, not because he doesn't love her, just the opposite, because he loves her. He does not want her to have to deal with yibum. So Rabbi says, now Ruvain appoints a shaliach, Yehuda. He says, Yehuda, be mekadel this get on behalf of my wife. So Rabbi says, so the shaila is, can Ruvain do that? And Rabbi say, what does it hinge on? Does receiving a get in order to exempt you from yibum, is that a zechus? Is that something objectively beneficial? So watch this. So the Gemara says, Mazaki get l'shomako b'yibumau, kevan d'sayin elei zechusula. So do we say that since potentially Rachel really doesn't like her brother-in-law? Rabbi say, now Sanya literally means despises. Rabbi say, what it means is, in general, Yibum is complicated. Yibum is really complicated because suddenly you're thrust into a marital relationship with someone with whom you're related to, someone who perhaps you have a long history with. So do we say that at the end of the day, it's in the best interest of the woman not to be in a Yibum scenario? Therefore, Odoma, so therefore, saying this is chus. Therefore, it's an objective benefit. She might really not like her brother-in-law, and therefore, Allah Lamaisa, giving her a get to exempt her from yibum was a real zechus. Odoma, the other possibility is, Kevan dezimnin derach malei chofula ve'in chaven la'adam shelo b'fanav. Or conversely, we could say no. And we'll say maybe there are times where Rachel likes her brother-in-law. Others will say it's hard to tell. Sometimes yibum is a bracha, right? And sometimes yibum is a klala. So sometimes she can really hate her brother-in-law. Sometimes she can have very warm feelings towards her brother-in-law. And yibum could be a true blessing. So what should you do? And we learn this. Shabbos said, the Gemara says, the answer is in our Mishnah. Because Shabbos said, what does the Mishnah say? Where she claims that halacha l'maisa, my husband died, my brother died, my brother-in-law died, and then the husband. I'm sorry, my husband died, and then the brother-in-law died. Ultimately, you know, say so. She's coming back saying, "I'm subject to yibum." What's the halacha? Cholet says v'lo misyavemes. So both say, even though we don't accept her testimony to make her subject to yibum, we are choshesh for her words. Now, what does that mean? Look at Rashi. V'choshen dvareha midiktani b'tarbayu choshen biyitzia b'chazkas hetel lashok. Oba v'chsika atzman liyavam v'katani choshen v'lomin ukma achazaka b'tinase davada mishakra mishum derach malei ka'amra alma lo mechaskina lebi ava. Ubeditani na'im b'chazka yosei liyavam. Shabbos say we see over here that halacha l'maisa. It's not clear. Sometimes yibum is a zechus and sometimes yibum is a chov. So therefore, I will say because of that, a man could not appoint a shaliach to receive a get on his wife's behalf without her consent. So I will say it's interesting. So it's intuitive and obvious. Sometimes being freed from yibum will be a zechus, and sometimes being freed from yibum will be a chov. So because again it cuts both ways, so I will say the only time you could do something unilaterally on behalf of someone without their knowledge or consent is when it's an objective benefit. So the point where the Gemara says is a man cannot go ahead and appoint a shaliach without his wife's knowledge or consent to receive a get on her behalf, because Lamaisa again, sometimes being freed from yibum is a good thing, sometimes it's not a good thing. Good. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amar le Ravina, let's listen to this case. Hamizaki get le ishto b'makom kitata mahu Well, I'll say, listen to this case. It's fascinating. What happens if there's a bad marriage? Bad marriage, right? And so a husband decides to appoint a shaliach to receive a get on behalf of his wife. So I'll say, so Reuven doesn't tell Rachel, right? Reuven and Rachel have a terrible marriage. Objectively terrible marriage. They're always fighting. No shalom bayis. Terrible on every level. So Reuven decides, you know what? Enough is enough. I'm going to go ahead and appoint a shaliach on behalf of my wife. Rachel doesn't know about it, right? To receive a get on her behalf. So Rabbi say, is this mutter? On one hand, we could say, Kevan de islay ketata bahadei zechus ula. So we could say, listen, on one hand, it's a terrible marriage. They're always fighting. So because they're always fighting, then what? It's a zechus for Rachel to be freed from this marriage. O dilma, necha de gufa adifla. They both say sometimes being married to someone, right, is better than being married to no one. To which the Gemara says, Tashma da Amrish Lakish tav lameisan tandu me lameisav armala. Right, Rish Lakish says it is better to go ahead and be with someone than to be alone. Also, I think it's a famous Ma'amar Chazal. How does it go? If you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. Right? Something like that. I don't know which Masechta that's in. I will say, but Lamaisa is something amazing. So I will say, this is an interesting yesod. So I will say, I'll mention to you that remember, I will say, we hear this, and to us it sounds very strange. But understand, obviously, I will say, we know the Gemara has just Bismillah Gemara, and even until not so long ago, the conception of marriage was fundamentally different than the way we approach marriage today. I will say, right, so today, right, contemporarily, marriage is so much about relationship, right? Marriage is about companionship, shared goals, dreams, aspirations, life vision. It's beautiful. And I will say, historically, what was marriage about? Security. That's what it is. I'll say again, common goals. We know each other's names, there's enough to allow us to build a family together, to build a life together. I'm not minimizing the importance of these secondary pieces, just reflecting the idea that historically they were not part of the equation. So Rish Lakish says sometimes just having another body. Right? Sometimes just not being alone, having someone else in the house. There is shalom bayis, there's not shalom bayis. That's a plus, right? That's a plus. So therefore, again, the Gemara will say, even in a case where the marriage is turbulent, there's kitata, it's not so pashit that getting a get is a zechus. Quite amazing. So I'll say, the Gemara goes down and talks about this. The Gemara says, Abayi says, Deshum shemana gavra kurse bechursa ramulei. Rashi says over here, Gavra, even if a husband is as tall as an ant, in other words, very short husband, Kurse Becharsa Ramula. We'll say, if you look at Rashi, Kurse Becharsa Ramula literally means she could put her chair amongst the free women. Others are both saying the idea that when a woman is married, it gives her status. Even if her husband is as short as an ant. What does that mean? Even if her husband himself doesn't have any level of social standing. Right, or her husband is not a chashav guy at all. Being a married woman gives us trouble. It's like the Gemara is backing up what we said before. That sometimes being married to someone, even if it's not a good marriage, by definition is a zechus for her because it affords her a societal status as being a married woman. Rav Papa says similarly, the naft gavra tikri besifi baba v'tesiv. Even if a woman's husband is a comber of wool. Rashi says over here, so we'll say apparently combing wool was considered to be a very lowly profession. But even if a husband has a very lowly profession, his wife will still call him to sit on the front porch with her. The idea being over here, that even if the husband himself has a lowly professional standing, right? A woman still takes certain privilege or certain status in being married. So the Gemara says, Rav Ashi Amar, the kol sagavra lo bay tal fichi l'kdeira. Even if a woman is married to a husband who has tainted yichus, who has tainted lineage, I will say, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, the kol sagavra shemetz pasol b'mishpacha. Even if lemaisa again, ultimately, again, the husband has tainted lineage. Still, in that case, again, the woman will lo baya talfachi l'kedera. Rashi says over here, they will not claim even lentils for dinner. Rashi says talfachi l'kedera adashin shumachol kal vein chisaron kiskol kach eino sha'alas mimeno eich yikra shma laha. See, Rabbi say what it's Gemara saying over here. Even if the husband has tainted lineage, so the idea is being there's not such a great shidduch. A wife will not even ask a bowl of lentils from her husband. In other words, the idea about say all of these things paint the same picture, which is sometimes a woman is willing to marry someone who really doesn't have a profession, doesn't have social standing, doesn't have societal standing, because being married gives her a sense of security and social standing. The Gemara says, Tana, v'kulon mizanos v'tolos v'alein. An interesting conclusion over here to the parak. But sometimes, unfortunately, again, the reason why sometimes people could enter into these kind of marriages is why? Because halacha l'maisa, marriage kind of gives them the cover to engage in illicit relationships. The idea being that, again, also sometimes when ultimately, again, there's nothing to the marriage. I just want to point out, because there's an incredible Musar Haskell in this. Sometimes when there's nothing in the marriage but a status of being married, people look for fulfillment in other ways. Rabbi say, I'll tell you an incredible vart. In the parsha, we'll say Parsha Sota. It's very interesting that the Torah juxtaposes two sections. Torah talks about the individual who does not go ahead and give Trumas and Maisrus. And right after that, ultimately what? Torah speaks about the section of Sota. So Rashi actually says something very interesting. Rashi says, if you don't bring Trumas and Maisrus, in other words, if you don't show up to the Beis HaMikdash to see the Kohen bring your Trumas and Maisrus, I'm going to find a way to bring you to the Kohen. You're going to come to see the Kohen when you bring your wife because she's a suspected Sota. I will say, what's the pshat? What's the pshat there? So I think Rashi is saying something amazing. So I will say, what kind of guy doesn't go ahead and give Trumas and Maisrus? Let's think about what kind of guy doesn't give Trumas and Maisrus? Someone who is stingy. I will say, if you're stingy with your money, chances are you're stingy with your emotions as well. And if you're not a sharing person with the common Levium, it's quite possible that you're not a sharing person with your wife as well. And I will say, if a man is not willing to share of his resources and of his emotions with his wife, it is only a matter of time until she seeks that fulfillment elsewhere. Doesn't condone her actions at all. But where there is not fulfillment in a marriage, by definition, people seek out fulfillment in all kinds of ways. So Rabbi said, the Gemara is saying over something amazing. As much as a woman would rather remain married, because halacha l'maisa, marriage affords her some level of status, just know that if all the marriage gives her is status, unfortunately, the other pieces of marriage, the fulfillment of marriage, the emotions of marriage, the intimacy of marriage, will be sought out elsewhere. Now we'll say, Hadjun Allah, Ha'isha Shalom, I'll say, Mazel Tov. Tomorrow, B'Shat Tov Masachas, we begin the last parak of Masachas Yevamos. Shkoyach.